So I've been playing a lot of Last Epoch in preparation for the 1.0 release a bit further down the line in February. And I have to say, I am really hyped for this release. And I want to talk about it with you guys for a bit. So hear me out. I played originally a lot of Diablo, right? And more recently, since last June, I've been playing nonstop Diablo 4. And that's what kind of started this channel in the first place. And what I love about Diablo 4 is the campaign and the visuals, the music, just the feel of it, really. And then more recently, I discovered Path of Exile, right? And that was a big revelation for me. I always knew the game existed, but I never tried it. And since then, I've been playing a lot of Path of Exile. And it's undeniable that Path of Exile is a complex ARPG. Absolutely undeniable. Especially when you look at the breadth of all the functionalities that they've added in the last 10 years. It's just never ending. And that's the appeal of it, right? There's a lot of complexity when it comes to your build, a lot of possibilities, a lot of collecting, the currencies, the hideouts. How many seasonal systems exist in the game right now? Like over 10, right? So anyway, where does Last Epoch fit when you look at those two tangents? On one side, you have a game, Diablo, which is quite simple when you look at it. It's noob-friendly, I would say. It's really straightforward. And on the other side of that spectrum, you've got Path of Exile, which is not noob-friendly at all, but God, does it have a lot under the hood to love. And this is where I think Last Epoch fits in the middle of both of these games. In my experience, Last Epoch isn't that complex to get to grips with. It's actually quite simple. The tooltips are in your face, and you've got a lot of good guides in there that are in the game itself, so you don't really need to Google anything from the onset, which is something I've done with my channel, right? Where every time I try a new game, I try and go as far as I can without needing to read up on guides. And Path of Exile was definitely the biggest challenge on that one. And it still is today when I try new seasonal content and I realize that, oh, wait, I should probably Google this. So anyway, Last Epoch, well, that's the thing about it. You don't really need to Google anything, not in the first 10 hours anyway. So I feel like the onboarding is actually smooth. The game is very good at telling you where to go and what to do. Visually, it looks really decent. The gameplay itself is engaging. And I think that's where Last Epoch really shines, is that the first 10 hours of the game, you're really scratching the surface, but you're not overwhelmed with technical functionalities or anything else like that, or systems. You're actually slowly getting into the game up until the point where I think you hit filters. When you start to hit filters, filtering itself, that's when you start looking at the game differently and you're kind of diving deeper into the menus. And the great thing about Last Epoch when it comes to filters is that it's got an amazing filter system in the game itself. When I first opened it up, I was like, wait, this is the Path of Exile filter, but it's in the game. And then it kind of clicked. The people who make this game, Last Epoch, are huge ARPG players themselves, where I think that Diablo 4 developers and the team aren't necessarily the biggest gamers, and sometimes you can tell. And on the other side of that, you've got Path of Exile, where they're probably the biggest gamers of them all, but I feel like they love spreadsheets a bit too much sometimes. And I feel like Last Epoch comes from that idea of like, let's take it all of it, take the good and the bad from all games, and kind of try to meet in the middle here somewhere. You know, the minimum viable product for this game was a game that had lots of depth when it comes to the build, which I want to talk about in a second, and also a really smooth accessibility for new players. That way you get to recruit more and more, right? You get more players involved. So let's talk about the builds actually for a second. Where I was really surprised was when we started looking at the passives tree and the skills tree and the abilities tree, all those trees. You can't help but think, wow, this is very straightforward. Put a point there, put a point here. It's a bit of a mix between Grim Dawn and Path of Exile when you think about it. But what you realize really quickly is that it gives you a lot to play around with. And to the contrary of Path of Exile, you are welcome to respec as much as you like, as long as you like paying gold and playing more, really, because when you respec some of these abilities, you just go down a level really on the ability itself, and you need to play with it again, a bit like gems, to level it up again. Where with Diablo, you just press a button and everything is respect, well, is back to 0, which I love, to be fair. And with Path of Exile, where you need to gather all this currency at the end game, which I don't like so much, Last Epoch, again, is at the forefront of the middle player here. It says, well, you can spend money, but you're going to feel it on this respec, or you can just go down a level. And I really like that. So the more you play around with it, the more you realize, wow, there's a lot of depth. There's a lot to love when it comes to these skill trees, and there's a lot to love in the depth of the builds that you're trying out. Not only that, but further down in the campaign, you get to specialize in one of these 3 branches. Reminds me of Grim Dawn, of course. And at that point, you just feel such freedom when it comes to the direction you take, where in Path of Exile, I would say that freedom kind of incapacitates you if you're playing without a guide. You kind of get paralyzed with the fear of making a bad decision. Last Epoch allows you to play around a bit, and so does Diablo, to be fair. But where Diablo has a very straightforward and simple talent tree, I feel like Last Epoch pushes that boundary a bit of complexity and trusts you to play around with your build. Make some decisions, see where you go. Another thing that makes me very excited about Last Epoch, it's the crafting. Have you guys played around with it? It's very intuitive. It takes the affix and prefix that we know and love from Path of Exile and other ARPGs, but it kind of boils it down to this crafting screen where you put gems in, you select what affix and prefix you want, and then you upgrade them, or you can use other currencies to make it random and stuff like that. And that, I think, is where we get the closest to a Path of Exile functionality, where you're actually getting down into the weeds of stats and prefix and affix and what would work best. But I had so much of this currency when I was playing the game that I felt like making a decision wasn't such a bad idea, or like trying something wasn't that scary because I had so much of the currency itself. I would just play around with the stats and see where I went. I'm sure at endgame it's different, but I feel like the crafting is very well thought of, which brings me to the developers and the team behind this game. I don't know if you've read their posts on their Steam page or on their website, on their forum, but when I was reading them, I couldn't help but feel like I was talking to a member of an ARPG community rather than a team project leader of a software development company, if that makes any sense. Every decision they make seems to be started from a person in the community, or potentially just ideas that come from playing ARPG games or even playing any other action RPG out there. And then they take these ideas and clearly they communicate with their team. I'm making assumptions here, huh? But I feel like their ideas and their features are so refined. I was reading recently the blog where they were talking about the trading and how they were going to tackle a very complex system for ARPGs, which is trading. It's always really tricky when it comes to trading in these games because there's a lot of ways to cheat if you're not careful. When you read this blog post and you find out that they've incorporated the idea of trading by joining a faction, I thought, that's innovation. You know what I mean? And I really like that. Mostly they looked at how can we innovate on some of these things? How can we put our own spin? And they did that not by staying in their silo and coming up with ideas, but I think they opened themselves to ideas from the community. Anyway, I've been waffling quite a bit on this one. And I really believe that a new ARPG coming in this circle, if you don't consider the early access, is brilliant for the other games that we love. The Diablos, the Grim Dawns, the Path of Exiles, Path of Exile 2. Competition breeds innovation. So yeah, it's a great time to be an ARPG player. If I had to sum it down, it's what I love about Diablo, it's what I love about Path of Exile, distilled into a game with some really innovative design under the hood, and some really unique approaches to some problems that other ARPGs have had in the past. The team behind Last Epoch also has something that I don't give out willy-nilly to video game developers these days, but they have my trust. I feel like within this team are people who really care about this space, about this community, and that they really listen to what the community says. I think the best example of that is all the updates that have been coming out since the early access period started. So are you guys going to play the game? Do you think they're going to nail it? I think it's going to be a very solid game when it releases, and it can only get better as we go along. Will it reach the player base of Diablo 4 or Path of Exile? We can only hope. I just want good video games, man. In any case, let me know what you think in the comments. Tell me if you're looking forward to playing Last Epoch. Are you going to be playing it? Should I play it on stream? Should I make videos about it? You let me know. And as usual, thank you so much for hanging out. Subscribe, come to the Discord, have a chat. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one. I love video games. We'll see you soon.